A friend of my Bestie's bought a mansion and insisted on taking us there to show it off. She said it was super cool in the summer, like it had natural AC. But she didn't know the chilly draft in that mansion was a spectral wind. The house was built on ground that raises the dead. She called me a scammer peddling superstitious BS, so I turned around and dug up 7 coffins in her basement. The killer is a small, thin man about 5'7", with a black mole on his left cheek. He's wearing a black short-sleeved shirt, blue jeans, and a pair of worn-out canvas sneakers. He posed as a delivery guy to get in. The moment the victim opened the door, he tried to snatch the Imperial Cinnabar bracelet from her wrist. The victim fought back too hard, and in the struggle, he accidentally killed her. I strolled around the crime scene with my hands behind my back, putting on an air of expertise as I described the incident to Officer Ray. All the other cops on site stopped what they were doing and stared at me in shock. One of the rookies, a young woman, had stars in her eyes. "Wow, that's amazing. Is that criminal profiling?" I gave a deadpan nod. "Keep studying hard. One day, you'll be as good as me." My best friend, Sophie, rolled her eyes beside me, muttering under her breath, "You really love to flex, don't you?" She wasn't wrong. I don't know the first thing about profiling. Everything I just said came from the victim, who was floating right next to me. The ghost was fuming, hands on her hips, practically poking her finger in my face. "Master Lin, you have to catch that killer for me and fast." "Arg, I'm so pissed. I just flashed my Imperial Cinnabar bracelet online, and now I'm dead. Damn it. I still have so much money I haven't spent. When you catch that bastard, you have to make sure he gets the chair. Immediately. I'm an exorcist and also an influencer. I spend my days doing online fortune-telling and physiognomy readings, while also selling some talismans and feng shui decor. A little while ago, a serial killer started terrorizing our city. All the victims were found dressed in red with their hearts carved out. The killer wasn't human. It was a ghost. At the time, a bunch of influencers, chasing clout, started a trend of live streaming themselves wearing red. Today's victim, Ms. Tanya Lee, was one of those influencers. To protect them, I had them wear Sophie's Imperial Cinnabar bracelet. Imperial Cinnabar is the highest grade of cinnabar, said to be worth its weight in gold. And within every cinnabar mine, at the point of purest yang energy, a single piece of Imperial Cinnabar is produced. With Imperial Cinnabar in hand, you're impervious to all evil. Sophie's bracelet was worth over $200,000. Tanya had bragged about the bracelet on her stream, flashing her wealth, which led to this disaster. I opened a black umbrella, collected Tanya's soul, and made a cool exit with a wave of my hand, leaving a crowd of awestruck admirers in my wake. With Tanya's cooperation, the police quickly produced a sketch of the suspect. Next came the city-wide manhunt. For me, the case was more or less closed. After just 2 days of rest, Sophie was already getting antsy. Where have all the ghosts gone? My live feed is so boring lately, just a bunch of fortune tellers. It's either catching a cheater or finding out they've been cheated on. Ugh, can't we get something a little more exciting? I flicked her on the forehead. As long as the world is free from sickness, why worry if the medicine on the shelf gathers dust? The world being at peace is a good thing. Your spiritual discipline still needs a lot of work. Sophie rubbed her head, looking wronged, and walked away. A moment later, she returned laden with bags. "Come on, let's go. A friend of mine just bought a 1920s-style mansion in the mountains. She was just bragging in the group chat about how amazing it is, and invited a bunch of people for a party. Let's go check it out." The road up the mountain was incredibly rough. Thank God Sophie was driving her G-Wagon. A car with any less clearance wouldn't have made it. The mansion was hidden halfway up the mountainside, a charming old house. Vibrant red roses climbed the weathered fence, giving it the feel of an old European castle, except for the overwhelming aura of death. I glanced at Sophie, who was excitedly hauling luggage. Well, at least she wouldn't be bored for the next couple of days. The moment Sophie and I stepped into the lavishly decorated living room, all eyes turned to us. I did a quick scan. A few exquisitely dressed young men and women were sitting on the sofa, having afternoon tea. As we approached, a tall girl in a red dress walked over, oozing charm. Well, Sophie. Is this the new little girlfriend you're spoiling? I understood all the words, but the combined meaning left me confused. Sophie was clearly just as lost. She stared blankly at the beautiful girl. Who? What girlfriend? Vivian, what are you talking about? Vivian Liu covered her mouth and giggled. Oh, come on. Everyone's saying you got tired of men and started getting into women. In our circle, who cares if you like women? Why deny it? This must be the little girlfriend you're spending a fortune on. She's not bad looking, I'll give you that. Sophie's face went pale. She leaped back a step, raising her arm and shouting, "That's slander. Someone is slandering me in here." After Sophie's frantic explanations, everyone finally believed that I was an exorcist and Sophie was my lay disciple, more or less. Vivian squinted, sizing me up for a long moment. An exorcist? A female exorcist? I nodded. She curled her lip in disgust. Have female scammers become the new trend? There was another one before, some girl named Jessica Chiao. Looked so young, but she insisted this house was uninhabitable and wanted $200,000 to perform a cleansing. Claimed to be the sole heir of some master geomancer. She's barely old enough to have all her teeth, and she's a master geomancer? Hilarious. I might as well call myself a celestial master. I gave her a serious, affirmative look. Jessica Chiao is definitely a scammer. This job only costs $20,000. Damn it. I haven't seen that bitch in a while, and she's still as greedy as ever. Sophie nudged me with her elbow. An enemy? Last time, that witch asked me to help her deal with a mother-child wraith from a drowning. After we were done, the client paid her $108,000. Guess how much she gave me? I held up 4 fingers. $40,000? She gave me $20 for gas. Sophie stroked her chin. Damn, that is cold. Seeing us lost in our own conversation, Vivian got even angrier. Sophie, what's your problem? I invite you over to have a good time, and the person you bring starts saying my house is haunted the second she walks in. Are you trying to jinx my place? What is your deal? As our argument escalated, the young people who had been on the sofa gathered around. Vivian, what's wrong? You know how Sophie is. Don't be mad. A guy in gold-rimmed glasses stepped forward and put his arm around Vivian. Looked like her boyfriend. Sophie flew into a rage. What the fuck, Ben? What the hell is that supposed to mean? What temper? I sniffed the air. The deathly chill in this house was unusually strong. It was a midsummer afternoon, which should have been the hottest part of the day, but with no AC or fans on. I was starting to feel a coldness creep up from my toes, even with a jacket on. All right, let's everyone just calm down. What's there to fight about? A short-haired girl with fair skin and delicate features gently pulled Sophie aside. Sophie finally snorted. Fine. Since Renee said so, I'll give her some face. Sophie and I were led to a sofa on the side. The atmosphere was suddenly awkward. The more Vivian thought about it, the more indignant she became. This mansion had belonged to her grandfather, and she'd fought tooth and nail with her cousins to get it. And now, before she'd even had a chance to live in it, people were showing up one after another, claiming the place wasn't clean. Lucy Lynn, right? You say this house isn't clean. How can you prove it? Sophie snorted. Proving it is nothing for Lucy. But if this house really is haunted, it's not going to be a $20,000 job. It'll be $200,000, no, $300,000. Vivian had grown up abroad, steeped in the most modern education. She wasn't about to believe any of this. She slapped the sofa and shot to her feet. $300,000 it is. Everyone here can be a witness, so no one can back out later. Sophie winked at me excitedly. $300,000. Heh, way more than that, Jessica Chiao. I was quite satisfied with that price. I stood up and walked a lap around the house, soon arriving at a maid's room on the far north side. Everyone followed me curiously. With 7 or 8 people packed into the 100-square-foot room, it instantly felt crowded. If I wasn't mistaken, this mansion was built on ground that raises the dead. And it was an artificially created one at that. Some dark arts practitioner from the past must have specifically chosen this place to raise zombies. The floor of this house still bore the remnants of a broken ghost gathering formation. And this maid's room was located right at its epicenter. Why is this room even colder than the living room? Renee Wong rubbed her arms and leaned against Ben Chung. I glanced at the wooden bed against the northernmost wall. Sophie, help me move the bed. Soon, Sophie and I had tilted the bed against the wall, exposing the floorboards. Everyone gasped at what they saw on the floor. Holy shit! What is that stuff? Even Sophie couldn't help but cry out. On the dark red wooden floor grew a cluster of mushrooms. The largest was the size of a palm, while the smaller ones looked like ordinary shiitakes from the supermarket. The mushrooms were entirely black, but the edges of their caps were a brilliant, vivid red, looking incredibly eerie. What is this? A young guy dressed like Prince Charming suddenly dashed forward. Before I could react, he had already reached out to touch one of the mushrooms. Don't touch it. But it was too late. The moment he touched the mushroom, a black mist exploded into the air, instantly filling the room with a putrid stench, like hundreds of dead rats and cans of fermented herring had been piled inside. Ugh. Sophie and I quickly retreated out the door. What the hell is that smell? It's disgusting. Sophie pinched her nose so hard her eyes were about to roll back into her head. That idiot Leo is so impulsive. He has to touch everything he sees. Serves him right for getting a face full of that. I waved my hand in front of my face, trying to disperse some of the pungent air. It's called a corpse spore mushroom. When touched, it sprays a large amount of spores into the air. That black mist you saw was it. The smell can cause ordinary people to have all sorts of hallucinations. Anyway, you'll see what I mean. Sophie and I were wearing plenty of protective charms, so we weren't affected. The others weren't so lucky. When the door opened and the black mist dissipated, everyone started acting strangely. Leo, the first to touch the mushroom, stood foolishly in front of it. After a moment, his eyes grew fierce and predatory. He raised his hands and mimed strangling the air. You bitch. I'll kill you. Sophie took a step back in shock, then with a serious expression, pulled out her phone and started recording everyone in the room. Ben, meanwhile, was caressing the wall with a look of pure avarice. Is this the stock transfer agreement for the Lu Corporation? Ha ha ha, it was all worth it, slaving away for that flat-chested Vivian for all those years. Sophie and I exchanged a look. Interesting. Very interesting. Renee, who was usually Vivian's best friend, was now facing a mirror with a twisted expression. Hey Vivian, don't you look down on me? You hate that my family just runs a construction company. But while you look down on me, your boyfriend Ben can't get enough of me. You should take a look in the mirror. You're so flat you can't tell your front from your back. Without your money, what man would even give you the time of day? Hearing this, Sophie and I quickly turned to look at Vivian. She had her legs spread, her left hand in a loose fist, while her right hand pumped up and down in the air. Giddy up. So what if I'm a girl? One day, all of you will bow down before me. Only I can lead the Lu Corporation to its peak. You're all useless, a bunch of good-for-nothings. Tisk rich people drama, Sophie muttered, a little indignantly. That's not true. My family is pretty decent. We don't have all this backstabbing. Those words would come back to bite Sophie in the ass time and time again. Curses, ghost familiars, love hexes, feng shui arrays. Sophie's family could have held their own supernatural showdown. After recording for a while, Sophie finally straightened up, satisfied. How do we get these guys back to normal? It's easy. Just a drop of blood from their middle finger on the point between their eyebrows. The corpse spore's toxin spread quickly, but it wasn't very potent. In the natural order of things, good always triumphs over evil. The blood from the middle finger is rich in yang energy, which naturally counteracts the toxin. Sophie nodded. Ben was standing closest to the door, so she grabbed his middle finger and swiped it hard, drawing blood. Once the blood was applied, Ben was the first to snap out of it. He stared blankly at me and Sophie, completely bewildered. Meanwhile, Vivian was still riding her horse, and Renee was still muttering to the mirror about how obsessed Ben was with her body. She's slandering me. That's libel. Ben jumped, his face flushing crimson. He looked panicked, his eyes darting away. What are you yelling about? Vivian can't hear you right now. Hurry up and put your finger on their foreheads to break the spell. Ben immediately rushed over to Renee, then stopped, holding his hand up, and turned to us with a lost look. Where's the spot between the eyebrows? A group of people sat on the sofa, each with a bloody fingerprint on their forehead, their expressions all a bit unnatural. Vivian slammed the table and stood up. You two were the only ones unaffected. Sophie, was this your doing? I get it now. You must have put some kind of hallucinogen in the water. At her words, everyone else looked up, a wave of realization dawning on their faces. Seeing this, Vivian became even more certain of her theory. She puffed out her chest and lifted her chin. Sophie, you've really thrown all shame to the wind just to promote this little exorcist. You have to give me an explanation for what happened today, or this isn't over between us. Impatiently, Sophie also stood up and walked straight to the corner to grab her suitcase. You're really just asking for trouble, aren't you? I can't stand it. A bunch of idiots. You know what? Screw it. Let it all burn. Lucy, let's go. Let's not waste our time here. Sophie had a fiery temper. Once she got going, no one could stop her. I didn't say anything, just grabbed my luggage and followed her. Of course, we couldn't actually leave. If we did, everyone in this house would be dead by morning. I figured I'd try to talk some sense into her in the car. After all, these were her childhood friends. Sophie wouldn't really leave them to die. Vivian and the others just stood there without moving. Ben, in particular, looked like he couldn't wait for us to leave. Sophie let out a cold laugh and dragged her suitcase out without a backward glance. We hadn't been driving for long, and I was still trying to figure out how to persuade her to go back, when Sophie slammed on the brakes. I looked up and saw a huge pine tree lying across the narrow mountain road. The trunk was so thick you probably couldn't wrap your arms around it. Sophie jumped out of the car, put her hands on her hips, and kicked a branch in frustration. Damn it, what rotten luck. I tugged her arm. Look there. Following my finger, Sophie's expression immediately turned cold. The cut on the tree trunk was perfectly smooth. It had clearly been sawn through. Someone obviously didn't want us to leave. Sophie pulled out her phone, glanced at it, and tossed it back in her bag. This is a satellite phone. I can get a signal in the middle of nowhere. If even I can't get a signal, there's only one possibility. The signal is being blocked. We both turned to look back at the mansion hidden in the mountain forest. Someone wanted us to stay. Who could it be? Sophie actually laughed, though it was laced with anger. Fine. I'd like to see who's playing games behind our backs. When I find them, I'll skin them alive. By the time we got back to the mansion's entrance, the people inside were in a frenzy, trash-talking me and Sophie. Vivian was the most worked up. What's Sophie so proud of anyway? She's a perfectly good rich kid. But she doesn't manage her company, she avoids social events, and she just hangs around with a fake exorcist all day. I heard she only shows up at antique auctions now, spending a fortune just to make that little Taoist happy. And she calls it a master-disciple relationship? Does she think everyone's an idiot? I looked at Sophie, speechless. She twitched her lips and glanced at me. All I can say is dirty minds see dirt everywhere. The group was deep in their heated discussion, even bringing up Sophie's habit of being late to parties several times. Sophie's eyebrow twitched. Unable to take it anymore, she kicked the door open. There's a ghost. A chorus of screams erupted from inside. After the initial panic subsided, everyone glared at Sophie. When Vivian saw us return, a mocking smile spread across her face. Don't tell me you came back just to eavesdrop on us? Sophie was about to curse her out, but I stepped forward and held her back. There's a big tree blocking the road down the mountain. I checked. The trunk was sawn through. And our phones suddenly lost signal. Why don't you check if yours still work? The room fell quiet for a moment. Vivian looked at me suspiciously, then doubtfully pulled out her phone. Sure enough, none of their phones had a signal. A frantic group of people drove down the mountain. And just as I'd said, they saw the massive tree blocking the road. Ben and Leo tried to move it, but the tree weighed several hundred pounds. They pulled on the branches for ages, but it didn't budge an inch. Everyone returned to the mansion, their hearts heavy. For a while no one spoke. The silence was unnerving. Vivian's face was pale. She bit her lip and frowned, then stood up and walked over to me. Is there really something wrong with this mansion? Sophie snorted. Miss Liu, use that brain of yours for a second. If there was nothing wrong with this house, why would someone go to all this trouble to keep us from leaving? Holy shit, this is your house. I was wondering how you managed to snatch this place from your pack of jackal-like cousins. This couldn't be a setup, could it? The moment the words left her mouth, Vivian's face went white as a sheet. Her eyes widened, and she seemed to lose focus for a moment before raising a hand and slapping herself across the face. From the look on her face, Sophie had probably hit the nail on the head. TSK rich people. Vivian took a few deep breaths, forcing herself to calm down. Tonight, everyone will sleep in the living room. I'll have the staff bring in some mattresses. I don't know what their goal is, but it's very likely someone could die. There might be a killer mixed in with us, or they could be ambushing us in the mountains. Whatever the case, we have to stick together. That's the only way to maximize our safety. I couldn't help but be a little impressed with Vivian. She has a brain, just not a big one. Did it ever occur to you that the killer might not be human? Just as I finished speaking, a mountain wind howled past the window with a mournful whiz sound. It was like thousands of ghosts wailing outside. The main door slammed shut with a loud bang, making everyone jump. Vivian was getting desperate and angry. Can you stop causing trouble at a time like this? It's so cold tonight, and there are so many of us. Where else are we supposed to stay but inside? By now, the sky was completely dark. The days were long in summer, so it was probably around 7 p.m., the hour of Sue. I suggest we walk down the mountain right now. It's not that high. If we move quickly, we should be able to get out before the witching hour. No one agreed. The mountain path was rugged, and there were no streetlights at night. The descent would be difficult, and none of these pampered rich kids wanted to endure that hardship. Sophie once again picked up her bag to leave. This is so annoying. They're beyond saving. Let it all burn. Lucy, let's go. As we argued, a blood-curdling scream came from the kitchen. Vivian had brought 4 maids from home to cook. It looked like something had happened to them. The people who had been sitting on the sofa watching us argue all stood up. Renee was so scared she was practically hiding in Ben's arms. A young woman in her early 30s, covered in blood, came running from the hallway screaming, "Help me!" over and over. When she saw us, her eyes lit up, and she stumbled towards our group. But she didn't get more than 2 steps before another woman appeared behind her. This one was older, maybe in her 40s or 50s. I'd seen her when we arrived that afternoon. Vivian called her Mrs. Song, and said she was an excellent cook, especially skilled in Cantonese cuisine. Mrs. Song's once gentle face was now twisted in a vicious snarl. Right in front of us, she raised a kitchen knife and began hacking wildly at the younger woman. In moments, the poor woman stopped struggling and closed her eyes. Everyone was stunned by the bloody, violent scene. Even Sophie and I hadn't reacted in time. Mrs. Song retracted the knife, a mean grin on her face as she licked the blood from the blade. Then she got up and lunged towards Vivian. Vivian was completely frozen. Having been pampered her whole life, she had never witnessed such a scene. Intense fear made her legs go weak, her body powerless. She couldn't even turn to run. At the critical moment, Sophie leaped into the air and kicked Vivian hard, sending her rolling across the floor for several feet before she stopped. I kicked the knife out of Mrs. Song's hand and quickly stuffed a yellow talisman into her mouth. Black energy swirled across Mrs. Song's face, as if something was struggling to get out. I took 2 steps back, watching her warily. A moment later, Mrs. Song's flat stomach began to swell rapidly, and in an instant, it was as large as a woman 9 months pregnant. Not good. I quickly pulled out my peachwood sword. Just as I turned, Mrs. Song's bloated stomach exploded. Pink and red matter burst into the air, and then rained down. A length of pink intestine landed directly on the neck of Vivian, who had just sat up. From the first scream in the kitchen to Mrs. Song's stomach exploding, only a minute or 2 had passed. Sophie and I looked at each other. Sophie seemed bewildered. What the hell was that thing that just came out of Mrs. Song's stomach? My face was grim. An infant wraith. I underestimated this place. It even has infant wraiths. And where there's an infant wraith, there's a mother wraith. This place wasn't breeding ordinary ghouls, but a mother-child corpse. When a full-term pregnant woman dies in childbirth, a case of one body and two lives, it's highly likely to become a mother-child wraith. The baby, having spent a full term in the womb, on the verge of being born, dies inside. The resulting resentment is heaven-shaking, world-destroying. Sophie gasped. I had told her many times how powerful a mother-child wraith could be. Vivian and her friends were completely stunned, especially Vivian. She sat down on the ground, dazed, and then let out a furious roar. How dare they kill people? And plant a bomb in Mrs. Song's stomach? Are they insane? Sophie couldn't take it anymore. She rushed forward, grabbed Vivian by the collar, and slapped her hard across the face twice. I've had it with you, you fucking idiot. Since when do bombs make women pregnant? What kind of bomb was that? One made by a man? That's a mother-child wraith. It's a ghost. Open your goddamn eyes and see for yourself. As a rich girl, Vivian was naturally confident and proud. But often, the more confident someone is, the more stubborn they are, unable to accept explanations they don't agree with. She was stunned by Sophie's slaps, sitting dazedly on the floor, lost in thought. It was then that the others gradually began to process what had happened. Soon, the room erupted in wave after wave of screams. If I wasn't mistaken, the other two maids in the kitchen were already gone. For people dead in an instant. I felt a pang of guilt. I had underestimated this place. I should have forced them out of this mansion from the start. I thought the ghouls wouldn't come out to cause trouble until the witching hour, but they had started early. Summer days are hot, and it was only around 7 p.m. The ground, having baked in the sun all day, hadn't lost its young energy yet. Logically, those ghouls shouldn't have been active so early. I looked around at the group. These rich kids were either dumb, dumber, or useless. Everyone follow me now. Sophie, you lead. I'll cover the rear. We're heading down the mountain immediately. This mother-child wraith was ferocious. If it were just me and Sophie, it wouldn't be a problem, but I couldn't guarantee I could protect this many people at once. Better to get this group out first. I could come back tomorrow at noon to deal with the wraith. This time no one hesitated. They scrambled to their feet and ran towards me and Sophie. Vivian followed silently behind Sophie. I tied a red cord around each of their wrists. The cord was made from the finest black dog sinew, dyed with cinnabar, and then soaked in black dog blood for 9 full days. It could ward off evil and prevent ghosts from getting close. If anyone sees the red cord on the person next to them break, you have to tell me immediately. A broken cord means demonic possession. The path down the mountain was not going to be easy. Sophie led the way with a flashlight. Renee, terrified out of her wits, no longer cared about keeping her distance from Vivian. She tried several times to get closer and take Ben's hand, clearly seeking his protection. But Ben was wary of Vivian. After all, his family was nowhere near the same level as hers. He had moved heaven and earth just to get with Vivian. The day the reporters announced their relationship, his family's stock shot up nearly 10 points. So when Renee tried to get close again, Ben shoved her away. In their scuffle, neither of them noticed that Renee's red cord had snagged on Ben's watch. When Renee was pushed aside, her red cord slowly drifted to the ground. The group moved quickly through the night, soon reaching the fallen pine tree. Sophie jumped onto the trunk and helped everyone across one by one. But after we had walked a short distance, we saw the exact same massive pine tree lying across the path again. We were caught in a ghost loop. And if it could trap even me, this was no ordinary ghoul. I shone my flashlight around, and was shocked to find that someone seemed to be missing. Sophie, I called out to her, my heart sinking. Renee was gone. I was still hesitating when Ben walked quickly up to me. Master Lin, let's go. It's just Renee. There are so many of us here. It's not worth risking all our lives for one person, right? Sophie couldn't stand it. What the hell? Renee is your little side piece, isn't she? How can you be so heartless? Ben shot a panicked glance at Vivian, then stuck out his neck and yelled at Sophie. Don't you dare slander me, Sophie. Renee and I are just friends. Nothing happened. I was getting impatient. All right, stop arguing. You guys stay here. I'll go find Renee. Ben grabbed me, refusing to let me go. The earlier events had clearly terrified him. You can't go. Don't abandon us. If Renee's dead, she's dead. There are so many of us here. He clung to my wrist with all his strength. I was speechless. Who said you're going to die? Just as the group was about to fall apart, a woman's voice drifted from the top of the tree trunk. Sleep now, my sweet baby, sleep. In your dreams, I'll be with thee. It was Renee standing on the trunk, cradling a pitch-black infant in her arms. She was humming a lullaby, a loving smile on her face. Ben let go of my arm and shot behind me like a lightning bolt. Sophie rolled her eyes in disgust. Vivian, what kind of trash did you pick up? Are you blind? Just then, Renee lifted her head. She gave Ben a tragic smile. Ben, do you really want me to die that badly? Have you forgotten our trip to the Maldives? When we went to Japan to see the cherry blossoms? Or to Changbai Mountain to see the snow? You said you were only with Vivian because your family forced you to. You said I was the one you truly loved. Renee's expression was a mixture of sorrow and hatred. A moment later, her face changed, her eyes flashing with malice. Men, you all deserve to die. Vivian peeked out from behind Sophie. Just so we're clear, if you kill him, you can't kill me too, okay? TSK rich people. The infant wraith in Renee's arms flew straight at me, its mouth wide open, only to be caught in a net I threw out. This net was one of Sophie's grand creations, made from the same red cord as before. Ever since Sophie joined me, I've truly experienced the joy of being a pay-to-win player. We used to use those ghost warding cords one strand at a time. High-quality cinnabar and black dog sinew are hard to find. The black dog has to be pure black, without a single stray hair, and must have died of natural causes. After all, this stuff is used for exorcism. It can't carry any resentment. Sophie found the cord so useful that she just waved her hand and had a whole net woven from it. She even started a dog kennel that now houses hundreds of black dogs. Caught in the net, the infant wraith let out a piercing scream. Mother and child are connected by the heart. The mother wraith inside Renee's body went into a frenzy, letting out a sharp shriek and lunging at us. At that moment, Leo, who had been standing at the front, suddenly shoved Vivian forward and dodged nimbly to the side. These two guys, each one more pathetic than the last. With lightning speed, I pulled Vivian back and charged forward to meet Renee. Though the mother wraith was powerful, its strength was greatly reduced while possessing Renee's body. After a few moves, I managed to drive the mother wraith out of her. Sophie. Now, the moment the mother wraith was out, Sophie moved. She took the lightning-struck wood token from her neck and slammed it onto the wraith's head. I seized the opportunity, pulled out my gourd, and sucked both the mother and child wraiths inside. Their physical bodies had turned into wraiths, making their souls immortal and indestructible. Only by burning their corpses could they be completely eliminated. With the wraiths gone, Renee's eyes rolled back, and she collapsed to the ground. The mist surrounding us also began to dissipate. Only then did everyone realize we had never moved past the fallen tree. Vivian slapped Renee awake without ceremony. Renee sat on the ground, holding her face, which was flushing red and white. After slapping Renee, Vivian turned and glared fiercely at Leo. He finally broke, collapsing to the ground in fear. I didn't want to, but Henry Lou forced me, using my family's company. My company's cash flow was cut off. That's my life's work. I had no choice. Henry said that as soon as I got to the house, if I just pulled out the peachwood stake in the northwest corner of the yard, he would help stabilize my company. I swear all I did was pull out a single stake. Vivian's face was as black as the bottom of a shoe. Sophie leaned in and whispered in my ear, Henry Lou is Vivian's uncle's son. TSK rich people drama. The night was getting later. I stepped forward to stop the drama. All right, settle your scores at home. If we're not off this mountain by the witching hour, you're all going to die here. Vivian gasped. What time is the witching hour? Sophie rolled her eyes. It's 11 p.m., you idiot. We have 3 hours. Everyone immediately tensed up. Ben and Leo stuck close behind Sophie, wishing they'd been born with 2 more legs. Vivian walked silently ahead of me, keeping a distance of about 3 feet from Renee. In one short night, the triple betrayal of love, friendship, and family had clearly hit her hard. Renee kept looking back, as if she wanted to say something but couldn't. After I captured the mother-child wraith, the rest of the journey down the mountain was uneventful. Our group moved quickly and descended from the mountain. When we reached the main road, Sophie's phone had a signal again. She called for a few cars to pick us all up and take us to her villa on the outskirts of the city. But Leo, Ben, and Renee clearly didn't want to be around Vivian. They all made excuses and quickly left. I had just washed up and gone to bed when I heard the sound of suppressed sobs from the room next door. I covered my ears and rolled over, only to hear the door across the hall open, followed by Sophie's booming voice. Vivian, are you wailing for a funeral? Keep crying and you'll attract a ghost. Vivian opened her door, her voice loud and clear. Sophie, what kind of crappy mansion is this? The soundproofing is terrible. It's a shoddy job. They argued for a good half hour before both slamming their doors and going back to sleep. The next morning, Vivian, sporting 2 giant dark circles under her eyes, announced that she wanted to go back to the mansion with us. I want to see what's in that mansion that made Henry go to such lengths to set me up. Then she turned and looked at me respectfully. Little master, may I go? Little master? Sophie immediately exploded. What the hell, Vivian? You dare try to poach my master? I'll kill you. Vivian, with Sophie's arm wrapped around her neck, struggled to pull a card from her pocket. Cough, cough. Damn it, Sophie, let go. Cough. Little master, there's $500,000 on this card. I want to become your disciple. Of course, I couldn't take her as a disciple. Vivian wasn't like Sophie, who had loved horseback riding and fencing since she was a child. Vivian had gone to art school, studying violin and painting since she was young. She was the type to get winded after running a few steps. I waved my hand. Oh, what's money got to do with it? This is all for the sake of saving humanity. Don't let it happen again. I'll accept it this time, but no more of this in the future. How about this? When you can last more than 10 moves against Sophie, I'll take you as my disciple. Hearing this, both Sophie's and Vivian's eyes lit up. Hee hee hee. Sophie let out a particularly creepy laugh. This girl had been practicing martial arts with me for a while, and her skills had improved by leaps and bounds. Forget 10 moves if Vivian could last 2. It would be because Sophie was holding back. At Sophie's command, a group of people followed us up the mountain in their cars. I glanced at the massive convoy. Good Lord, there was even an excavator and a bulldozer. Anyone who didn't know better would think we were a demolition crew. Vivian, decked out in a pile of anti-evil gear she'd bought from Sophie at a high price, felt much more at ease. I set up a ghost-slaying formation in the yard and led Sophie and Vivian into the mansion. Even in broad daylight, the mansion was still shrouded in a gloomy aura. I walked a circle on the first floor with my compass, but found nothing unusual. This house has a basement, right? Vivian shook her head. No, it's just a 3-story house with 2 courtyards. I walked another circle with the compass. The needle started spinning wildly when it reached the room in the northwest corner. There's definitely something under here. Have someone moved the bed? After the bed was moved, I knocked on the floorboards. As expected, it was hollow underneath. Sophie had someone pry open the floor, revealing a wooden door covered in talismans. I examined the door closely. It was made of old peach wood. Heh, no basement. Vivian hung her head and said nothing. I gave Sophie a look, signaling her to open the door. The moment the door opened a crack, a black shadow shot out. I looked at the palm-sized black infant thrashing in my net, and a terrible suspicion rose in my heart. Sophie brought out 2 searchlights, and we descended the stairs into the pitch-black basement, one in front of the other. The basement was huge, like an empty basketball court. I shone my light around and found Sophie standing to the side, completely dumbfounded. On the ground, stretching from near to far, were 7 crimson coffins, arranged in the formation of the Big Dipper. In the deep, dark basement, the sight was utterly bone-chilling. Hiss. A gasp sounded between me and Sophie. Sophie was so startled she nearly fell over. Holy crap. Vivian, what are you doing down here? Vivian stood there, clutching a flashlight, gaping at the scene before her. I shone my flashlight on each coffin in turn. 7 coffins in a row. The corpses will surely turn to wraiths. This person was trying to create something truly monstrous. It was a good thing Sophie and I stumbled upon this. The longer these things were left, the harder they would be to deal with. These can't be left here. Move them all up and burn them. With a wave of her hand, Vivian ordered the wall of this northwest room to be knocked down. An excavator came in and dug several large holes in the floor. They nearly demolished the entire house. The basement was instantly flooded with light, and the outlines of the coffins became clear. I walked up to a coffin and ran my hand over it, a wave of sadness washing over me. The coffin at the Big Dipper's position was the first to be carried out and placed in the courtyard. As the coffin touched the ground, the temperature around it dropped sharply, and small whirlwinds inexplicably kicked up in the yard. I had someone open the coffin. Inside, as expected, lay a woman with a large belly. She was dressed in clothes from the 1920s, yet her body hadn't decayed. Her beautiful cheeks even had a hint of a rosy glow. I reached into the coffin and found a letter placed by the woman's head. The envelope was yellowed with age. I opened it and started reading. Before I could finish, Sophie had leaned in. Holy shit. What a monster. The letter was from the Liu family's head butler, a man named Zhang. According to Mr. Zhang, the second young master of the Liu family had a penchant for married women, especially beautiful ones. Once he set his eyes on someone, he would stop at nothing to get her. He didn't even care if they were pregnant. The 7 female corpses in this basement had all been his victims. 4 of the non-pregnant women had committed suicide. The 3 who were pregnant were all murdered by the second young master. The woman with the largest belly was Mr. Zhang's niece. The second young master, relying on his family's power and wealth, had no regard for the lives of the poor. He gave the butler a large sum of silver to handle the aftermath, but Mr. Zhang secretly hid all the bodies in this mountain villa. Because this building was, in fact, the Liu family's ancestral home. 7 coffins in a row, the corpses turned to wraiths. The day these mother, child, and female wraiths were fully formed, not a single person with Liu family blood would be left alive. Vivian's hand trembled so much she could barely hold the thin sheet of paper. This second young master, he's my grandfather's second uncle, that's right. But Henry is also a Liu. He wouldn't want our entire family dead, would he? Sophie nodded. I always thought that cousin of yours wasn't too bright. He must have been tricked. He probably thought there was just some ordinary vengeful ghost in this house, and was planning to have it kill you quietly. I have to say, Sophie had guessed the truth again. As one coffin after another was brought out, the look in Sophie's eyes as she watched Vivian grew more and more contemptuous. The Liu family. I patted one of the coffins and looked at Vivian. Before, these ghouls were trapped by the formation, so your Liu family was safe. Once I burn these corpses, their souls will be scattered to the winds. And this debt will fall upon the second branch of your Liu family. Of course, since you're all connected by blood, the first branch's fortune will inevitably be affected as well. Vivian took a deep breath. Burn them. Whatever retribution comes, it's what our family deserves. I couldn't help but be a little impressed with Vivian. Sophie curled her lip. You think I don't know? Your first, second, and third branches are practically at war over the family inheritance. Don't act all righteous and noble about getting rid of a competitor, okay? The corner of Vivian's mouth, which she had been forcing down, finally turned up. Holy crap, the second branch is full of such perverts. I never realized they were all just like my great-great-uncle. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. They deserve it. All the coffins were brought up, and the faces of the women inside were revealed. Their bodies had become ghouls, uncorrupted and undecayed. The youngest looked to be only 18 or 19, while the oldest was nearly 40. From blooming youth to middle age, these women, who once had simple, happy lives, had all paid a terrible price for the second young master's evil desires. Sophie looked down and squeezed my hand. Is there really no way to grant them salvation? I sighed. Their bodies had turned into ghouls, their souls bound to them. Burning them was the only way. Humans are young, ghosts are in. Humans have their path of light. Ghosts have their path of darkness. But these ghouls, they defy nature, an affront to the world. Once burned, they would dissipate into the ether, unable to even be reincarnated. Mr. Zhang, blinded by hatred, had forcibly turned this villa into a ghoul-raising ground and created this 7-coffin formation. The karmic debt he himself would have to bear would be immense. Sophie's face was grim as she ordered people to build a pyre. The wood was all from 100-year-old peach trees, and ordinary fire couldn't burn these ghouls. As the great fire blazed, the once quiet mountains echoed with heart-wrenching wails. I clenched my fists, watching the scene unfold, my heart feeling heavy as if stuffed with cotton. After dealing with the Liu family's affairs, Sophie came over the next day, excitedly holding her phone. "Lucy, we've got a job. A big one." According to Sophie, something major had happened to the second branch of the Liu family last night. The second old master's debauchery had ruined his health, leaving him with only one son, Vivian's granduncle. The granduncle's family was mainly in real estate, but he couldn't control his own lecherous nature. So he had sunk most of his fortune into the film industry, and was now a titan in the entertainment world. Last night, Vivian's great-uncle had gotten into a car accident. Her other great-uncle had accidentally fallen down the stairs and broken his leg. Her two cousins' fates were even more bizarre. One fell off his horse while riding and was trampled in the stomach. The other was walking past an office building when a durian was thrown from a high floor, injuring his shoulder. While the Liu family was in chaos, they got a call from the cemetery. Great-uncle Liu's tombstone had cracked. Thanks to Vivian's introduction, I entered the Liu family cemetery dressed in my Taoist robes, holding my compass. Damn, these people were extravagant. The cemetery was built like a private garden, with lush trees and blooming flowers. Great-uncle Liu's luxurious tombstone was indeed split neatly down the middle, the cut so clean it looked better than an axe job. All the men of the Liu family's second branch were laid up in the hospital. Vivian's father was now in charge. When he saw me, his expression carried an involuntary note of gravity. He obviously knew about what happened at Vivian's mansion after all, for maids had died. The mansion was equipped with surveillance cameras, and he had helped Vivian with the cleanup and aftermath. According to Sophie, the Liu family had paid a huge sum of money to the maids' families. "Master Lin, Vivian is just a child and can be thoughtless. I apologize for any offense she may have caused." Vivian's dad cupped his hands in a respectful gesture and carefully handed me a card. "Since we're already troubling you with one matter, we can only ask you to trouble yourself with this one as well." Rich people really know how to talk. I took a turn around the grave with my compass. "Move great-uncle Liu out of here. And if your Liu family still has a family registry, open the ancestral hall, report to heaven and earth, and expel him from the clan." Vivian's dad's face changed drastically. Even Sophie was a little surprised. I patted the tombstone. "Vivian probably showed you the letter." What the second Liu master did was inhuman. The resentment of 7 ghouls will gather on the Liu family. As long as the resentment remains, disasters will not cease. Move him from your ancestral plot to a separate grave. Then, open the ancestral hall and expel him. His descendants might be able to keep their lives. After you've done those 2 things, build bridges, repair roads, do more good deeds to accumulate merit. Slowly, as the ghoul's resentment dissipates, the Liu family can return to normal. Vivian's dad wiped the sweat from his brow, his face extremely troubled. "But he's an ancestor. It's not right to disown an ancestor." I raised an eyebrow. "It's your choice. But you're all Lius. As long as the second master remains in this cemetery, no one in the Liu family will have peace. The closer the bloodline, the greater the impact. It's your ancestors or your descendants. You choose." Vivian's dad frowned and took a step back, then twisted his ankle on the flat ground, fell on his butt, and bruised his tailbone. He ended up being carried away by an ambulance. Later, I heard that as soon as Vivian's dad got out of the hospital, he immediately had great-uncle Liu's grave moved out of the Liu family cemetery. Sophie excitedly showed me Vivian's social feed on her phone. It was a photo of Renee and Ben sharing a passionate kiss at the foot of a snowy mountain, with the caption, "Wishing my good friend and my ex-boyfriend all the best. Remember to send me an invitation to the wedding." When Vivian made a move, it was truly something to behold. Sophie's eyes glittered with gossip. "Do you know how Vivian got that photo?" "Renee sent it to her." TSK rich people. Sophie has been very busy lately, running around digging up dirt on the Liu family. She's practically busier than a tabloid reporter. I was drawing some soul-guiding incense when she came skipping over with her phone again. Oh my God, Vivian went to confront her cousin Henry this morning. That mansion used to belong to the second branch, but they sold it to the first branch. Her cousin heard from somewhere that the house was haunted by a powerful ghost. So he set a trap for Vivian to take over the house. Now Vivian has found out. Guess who told her cousin? I was carefully grinding dried mugwort into a fine powder. Without looking up, I said, "Someone from the Zhang family, right?" Sophie slammed the table. Holy crap, Lucy, you're a psychic. It was one of Butler Zhang's descendants. The force of her slap sent the powder in the porcelain dish flying everywhere, scattering all over the floor. Seeing this, Sophie immediately turned tail and ran. I casually grabbed a nearby stick and chased after her. Sophie, you are so dead today. The end. Part 2. I was trafficked. On purpose. Because I discovered that the woman who abducted me had the aura of an early grave. She wore heavy perfume, but it still couldn't mask the stench of a corpse. Living? Dead. The living dead? Let go of me. I don't even know you. Let go. Early one morning, Sophie and I were at a diner eating bagels and coffee. A commotion suddenly broke out at the busy subway entrance. A middle-aged woman, who looked refined but was dressed plainly, had two burly men with her. She grabbed a meek, bespectacled young woman, yanked her hair, and slapped her hard across the face twice. Passers-by stopped in their tracks. A few hesitated, looking like they wanted to intervene. At that moment, Sophie and I were sitting in the bustling diner. I had just taken a sip of my coffee and was about to reach for another bagel when I noticed that the plate of bagels and Sophie, who was sitting across from me, had both vanished. I turned my head and, sure enough, saw Sophie holding the plate of bagels, already at the front of the gawking crowd. I've never understood why Sophie, a rich kid who has seen it all, is such a gossip. What do other people's problems have to do with her? Hey, don't push. You stepped on my foot. An older woman next to me shot me a glare. I sheepishly pulled my foot back. I'd run over too fast and wasn't watching where I was going. Seeing the crowd gather, the middle-aged woman got even more worked up. She grabbed the young woman's hair, forced her chin up, and in the struggle, the girl's glasses fell to the ground and were quickly crushed underfoot. Come look, everyone. This shameless homewrecker seduced my husband, tricked him into buying her a house and a car. That was our hard-earned money, our life savings. We were saving it for our son's study abroad. Now it's all gone. All of it, given to this shameless slut. A murmur went through the crowd. Sophie, while munching on a bagel, whispered to me, "Wife catching a mistress. So dramatic. But this girl doesn't look like a mistress." The older woman next to us turned her head, looked us over, and then spat on the ground. What do you young girls know? You think all mistresses are caked in makeup with seductive faces. A lot of them go for the pure and innocent act. Those are the most dangerous ones. They get the man and the money, tricking him into thinking he's found true love. Sophie nodded as if she'd just been enlightened. She does look pretty innocent. The young woman who'd been grabbed looked like she had just graduated from college. She had a round face, plain features, and with her glasses gone, she looked flustered and harmless. Hearing that it was a case of a wife catching a mistress, many who had been ready to step in and help immediately backed off. The middle-aged woman leading the charge crossed her arms, triumphant. "Big brother, second brother, take this homewrecker away. I'm going to make her spit out every penny she swallowed." Sophie nudged me with her elbow. "Lucy, what do you think?" I narrowed my eyes. "Sophie, what do you think of this weather?" Sophie wiped the sweat from her face. "It's boiling hot." It was the height of summer. The woman was wearing long sleeves and long pants. And after all that commotion, there wasn't a single drop of sweat on her face. The two men holding the girl, on the other hand, were already flushed and sweating profusely. "Look at the back of her hand. See it?" Sophie nodded. "I see it. Lots of purple bruises. Did her husband beat her?" "You idiot. That's livor mortis." On the scorching street, Sophie suddenly felt a chill run down her spine. She stared at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. This was the first time I'd seen anything like it. The woman's body must have been dead for years. Her skin had a sickly, grayish-blue pallor. If it were a case of spirit possession, her limbs would be stiff and mechanical, definitely not as flexible as they were now. Looking at her face, her forehead was sunken, her eyebrows met. Her face was small with a low nose, and the whites of her eyes showed on 3 sides. She should never have lived past 20, but she looked to be at least 35 now. Interesting. Very interesting. This woman had died, and then lived on for more than a decade? And not only was she living, her long dead body had continued to grow. Even a zombie only grows hair and nails. But she had matured and aged just like a living person, from a young girl to a middle-aged woman. After a moment of shock, Sophie's eyes lit up with fervent excitement. She shoved the plate of bagels into my arms, took a deep breath and shouted, "Let that girl go." Everyone turned to look at us. Sophie strode forward, pushed away the man holding the girl's arm, then turned, put her hands on her hips, and yelled at the middle-aged woman, "She's my sister. If you have a problem, take it up with me." The 2 men froze, sizing Sophie up. Their eyes lit up. If the first girl was a 3 out of 10, Sophie was a 10. A delicate, oval face with stunning, vibrant features. Plus, fair skin and a healthy, rosy complexion. Sophie's beauty was beyond that of any ordinary celebrity. The middle-aged woman was also excited. She craned her neck and glared at Sophie with an air of authority. "You say she's your sister? Then you're coming with us." Sophie pointed at me. "My best friend is coming with me too. A 2-for-1 deal." The middle-aged woman was overjoyed. The girl who had been let go stomped her foot anxiously. She grabbed my sleeve, her fear mixed with a hint of determination. "Don't go with them. They're bad people. I saw on TV that some human traffickers use the Catching a Mistress Act to kidnap women." I winkte her. "Don't worry. Imakop." This girl was good. A kind soul. I thought for a moment and slipped a piece of paper into her pocket. "If you ever run into trouble you can't solve, remember to call me. This is my number." Seeing that the show was over, the crowd dispersed. At the middle-aged woman's signal, one of the burly, dark-skinned men quickly drove over a beat-up van. The moment Sophie and I got in, the 3 of them dropped their act. "Mrs. Liu, we hit the jackpot this time." The man driving turned his head. "Mrs. Liu, my brother and I have worked for you for so many years. It's gotta be our turn now, right? We don't want money. We'll even give you money. Just give these 2 girls to us." Sophie and I clung to each other, trembling in feigned terror. What are you going to do?" The burly man sitting next to us sneered. "Take you home to be our wives." The woman's name was Lu Ping. The 2 men were brothers, Richie and Gordy Zhao. All 3 were from the same village. Their village was poor and located deep in the mountains, so the local men couldn't find wives. To ensure the village's bloodline continued, the village elder organized a collective fund. They sent the most trusted villagers, Mrs. Liu and the Zhao brothers, out to find women to bring back as wives. After 2 days of driving, we switched to a tractor, then a donkey cart. After about 4 different modes of transportation, Sophie and I finally arrived at the small mountain village hidden deep in the forest. During the journey, to keep an eye on us, Richie and Gordy took turns sleeping. After 2 days, they both had dark circles under their eyes. Our arrival in the village caused a huge commotion. Almost everyone came out to see us, young and old, their faces filled with greed and desire. Richie came forward and untied our wrists. With so many villagers around, he wasn't worried about us running. I gently kicked Sophie. "See the problem?" Sophie nodded. "This village has no women. It's all men. This useless girl." I rolled my eyes. Look closely at their faces. There were hundreds of men in the village, and a dark aura hovered over their swarthy, weathered faces. Judging by their fortunes, everyone in this village was destined to die within 7 days. Sophie obediently squinted and began to study them. "I see it. They're all really ugly." Richie's mouth twitched. He couldn't understand why Sophie and I were whispering so loudly, loud enough for the whole village to hear. Richie turned and shouted at Sophie indignantly, "So what if we're ugly? No matter how pretty you are, you're still gonna be my wife and have my kids. With that, Richie walked up to the village elder. Elder, it should be our turn first this time, right? My brother and I have brought back so many women for the village. If you give us these two, we'll give the village another $2,000. Sophie gasped. 2,000? For both of us. The elder looked at Mrs. Liu, who gave a calm nod. Richie and Gordy immediately broke into wide smiles, as if they'd just found 2 gold bars. The elder listens to Mrs. Liu? I looked at her, my suspicion growing. This village was clearly a trafficking hub. Not a single woman was to be seen in broad daylight. So why did Mrs. Liu, a woman herself, command so much authority here? Mrs. Liu glanced at me coolly. She had already noticed that Sophie and I were different. We weren't crying or screaming like the other women. Our faces didn't even show a hint of fear. She walked up to me with great interest. Are you a cop or a reporter? We're from the Women and Children's Protection Association. Sophie declared righteously. Let us go right now, or when our colleagues find this place, your village is finished. The villagers all burst out laughing. The old elder's face crinkled into a smile so wide it smoothed out all his wrinkles, like an old chrysanthemum. Don't you worry. Ordinary people can't get into this village. The old elder was right. A faint mist surrounded the mountains outside. I had just noticed that Mrs. Liu and the Zhao brothers were all wearing wooden tags around their necks. Without those tags, no one could find the entrance to the village. And naturally, the villagers couldn't leave without them either. The mist was a very simple barrier, and the wooden tags were the keys to enter and exit it. A small mountain village with a magical barrier and a living dead woman like Mrs. Liu. Interesting. This was very interesting. As Mrs. Liu led us toward the Zhao brothers, a stir went through the men in the village. Richie, be gentle with such pretty women. Yeah, don't break them before the rest of us get a turn. Filthy words echoed through the spacious ancestral hall. The elder coughed loudly, quelling the commotion. That's enough. Come draw lots. Sophie looked at Mrs. Liu in confusion. What are they doing? What lots? Mrs. Liu gave a cruel smile. They're drawing for you. It's the village rule. A new woman can only stay with one family for 3 months. If she doesn't get pregnant in 3 months, she moves to the next family. If she gets pregnant but has a daughter, she still has to move to the next family. Only if she has a son can the woman settle down with that family, and then she'll have a place for life. We call it the wandering wife system. Sophie was too stunned to speak. In a daze, we followed the Zhao brothers to their home. It was a typical rural courtyard with 4 red brick houses. Strings of bright red chilies hung from the eaves of the main house. As we entered, a thin, elderly woman in her 50s hurried out to greet us. Brought the wives back. When she saw Sophie, her face fell. This one looks so seductive. She's definitely not a virgin. Sophie was so angry she laughed. You look like a virgin to me. Did the family pig give birth to your 2 sons? I'll slap the foul mouth off you, you bitch. The old woman raised her hand to lunge forward, but was stopped by her son. Richie glared at his mother. Mom, what are you doing? I haven't even touched her yet. What if you damage her? Sophie and I were shoved into the east side room. It was a small room with only a simple wooden plank bed. Nothing else. The window was set high on the wall, and covered with iron bars. Standing in the room, Sophie and I felt like we were in prison. I'm going to get some explosives and blow this whole village up. Sophie said, looking at me seriously. She clearly wasn't joking. I gave her a sharp rap on the head. Don't be ridiculous. That's a bit too much. Ever since I entered my spiritual practice, my master always said we must exorcise demons and defend the peace of the human world. But looking at the hearts of these people, they seemed more demonic than any demon. Was the peace and quiet of this village a sign of a tranquil world, or a hellish purgatory? Sophie kicked the bed frame in frustration. Are all the women in this village locked up in rooms like this? How have they survived all these years? Soon it was dinner time. Mrs. Liu had said that misbehaving women only got 1 meal every 2 days. Only the most obedient and submissive women were allowed to eat until they were half full each day. The bedding on the plank bed was stained and smelled sour. A thin layer of dust covered the floor, leaving hardly a clean spot to stand. Sophie and I could only stand in the room like two wooden posts. We finally made it to after the Zhao brothers finished their dinner. The two of them eagerly dragged me and Sophie into separate rooms. And then they fell asleep. Sleeping like dead pigs. This village was very strange. To avoid alerting anyone, I had to let them off the hook for now. After Sophie and I left our rooms, we knocked out the Zhao brothers' mother. Then Sophie made a beeline for the kitchen. Damn. What is all this? In the end, Sophie and I were both gnawing on corn on the cob, our mouths greasy. We were starving. The 2-day journey to the village had left us ravenous. After devouring everything edible in the kitchen, Sophie and I finally felt alive again. Sophie, let's go to Mrs. Lu's place first. Mrs. Lu was the elder's daughter-in-law. The largest, most luxurious house in the center of the village was hers. We tiptoed through the dark courtyard. The village didn't even have streetlights, and for such a large place, no one seemed to keep dogs. We moved through the village by moonlight. The whole place was silent, like a long-abandoned ghost town. The further we walked, the creepier it felt. By the time we slipped into Mrs. Lu's courtyard, Sophie couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. I quickly clapped a hand over her mouth. As one of the living dead, Mrs. Lu was extremely sensitive to the breath of the living. To avoid being discovered, we couldn't even breathe in her courtyard. Holding our breath, we crept to the front of the main house. A light was still on inside, casting a dim, flickering glow that left the room half lit, half dark. Sophie and I cautiously peeked through the window. Mrs. Lu was sitting alone in the room. On the table in front of her was a sewing kit. As Mrs. Lu stripped off all her clothes, I moved with lightning speed and clamped my hand over Sophie's mouth. Sure enough, the rest of Sophie's scream was muffled in my palm. Mrs. Lu's appearance was so horrifying, it was no wonder Sophie couldn't help but scream. The Mrs. Lu inside the room had skin that was already rotten and shriveled. Her left chest was so decayed that her ribs were exposed. She carefully stitched the pieces of flesh that were about to fall off back together. Her back, when she turned, was a landscape of winding, dense stitches, like huge black centipedes crawling all over her. I swallowed hard. It was utterly disgusting. Why didn't she use flesh-colored thread instead of black? After tending to her own flesh, Mrs. Lu let out a visible sigh of relief. Only then did I notice a cradle on the chair in front of her. In it lay a baby girl with her eyes closed. The baby's face was pale, almost lifeless. With a look of maternal love, Mrs. Lu picked up the baby and began to hum a lullaby. She stood up, rocking the baby back and forth. Wisps of white mist began to float from the baby's body, all of it entering Mrs. Lu. As it did, Mrs. Lu's rotting flesh began to heal and regenerate, glowing with vigorous life. After a short while, Mrs. Lu put the baby down, sighing in satisfaction. Her face was now rosy, while the baby in the cradle no longer had any sign of life. Sophie and I quietly slipped out of the courtyard. Sophie's eyes were downcast. "Lucy, why didn't you save that baby?" I looked up at the moon. She couldn't be saved. Her life force was already drained. Even if we had snatched her from Mrs. Lu, she wouldn't have lived for long. Sophie wiped away a tear. What kind of monster is Mrs. Lu? She's not a monster. But there's definitely a demon in this village. Mrs. Lu was just a lingering soul possessing a corpse. She was able to absorb the baby's life force because a demon had given her half of its core. Sophie's eyes widened. I thought demons weren't allowed to exist after the founding of New China. Are there really demons in this world? I nodded. Animals that gain spiritual power become demons. Plants or other inanimate objects that gain spiritual power are called sprites. And when people die, they become ghosts. Then there are all sorts of ghouls, goblins, mountain spirits, zombies. The variety is endless. This small village was in a secluded location, surrounded by mountains. Some of the ancient trees had lived for thousands of years. In these dense forests, it wouldn't be surprising if some animal or plant had become a demon. After discussing it with Sophie, we decided to count the number of trafficked women in the village to prepare for a rescue. The house next to the elders was also large. Sophie and I easily climbed into the courtyard. From the east wing, we could hear suppressed screams. After a while, the screaming stopped, the door to the wing opened, and a man walked out, fastening his pants, a satisfied look on his face. Son of a bitch. I grabbed Sophie, who was about to charge in. Don't be impulsive. After the man went back to his room, Sophie and I crouched by the window. There wasn't even a lamp on inside, the light was very dim. We could just make out the figure of a woman lying on the bed, her clothes in tatters. She was so thin it was frightening at a glance. You might mistake her for a skeleton. Sophie bit her lip. She cautiously looked around, then began to call out in a low voice. Hey, what's your name? The clear, unfamiliar female voice startled the woman in the room. She sat up from the bed and stumbled towards the window. Only then did I notice that she walked with a limp, as if her leg was injured. When she saw us, she suddenly grabbed the bars of the window. Sophie was taken aback. The woman's hand gripping the bars was all protruding veins and bone. My heart ached at the sight. I pulled a cob of corn from my pocket and pushed it through the bars to her. Here, eat this. Were you trafficked here too? What's your name? The woman didn't bother to speak. She wolfed down the corn, choking so hard her eyes rolled back. After a long moment, she looked up, her expression unreadable. You two, are you new here today? Just trafficked. Sophie nodded and reached out to take her dry, emaciated hand. Don't be afraid. We'll get you out of here. Out. The woman's hoarse voice cut through the silent night. She stared intently at me and Sophie, then lowered her head and let out a soft, chilling laugh. Out. Out. She flipped her hand and gripped Sophie's slender, fair wrist with surprising strength. No one gets out. Help. Someone help. The two new women are escaping. In the dead of night, the woman's screams were loud and shrill. She seemed to be using every ounce of her strength to yell. Sophie and I were so close, the sound made our heads ring. Sophie tried to shake her hand free, but the woman's grip was like a vice. She was clearly using all her might to hold on to Sophie. I quickly reached out and pressed a pressure point on her wrist. The woman cried out in pain and let go. Under her hateful, resentful gaze, Sophie and I made a hasty retreat. The once dark village quickly lit up with lights. Seeing this, Sophie and I could only duck our heads and run for the mountains. On the winding mountain path, people were chasing us with flashlights and even torches. It looked like the entire male population of the village had turned out. Well, it made sense. We were, after all, village property. However, a bunch of ordinary people trying to catch me and Sophie was obviously a pipe dream. After nearly 2 hours of searching, the group trudged back down the mountain cursing. Richie, unwilling to give up, looked back one last time. He cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted into the mountains. Listen up. There aren't just wolves on this mountain. There are also plenty of poisonous snakes and other wild beasts. Come back to the village and you can at least stay alive. If you stay on the mountain by morning, there'll be nothing left of you but bones. Richie shouted this 3 times before he was reluctantly dragged down the mountain by the other villagers. Sophie and I sat on a high branch of a towering tree, silently watching the villagers. Sophie's face was dark. The recent event had clearly dealt a major blow to her young heart. Lucy, why do you think she did that? Why? I sighed and leaned against the tree trunk. The dense leaves blocked the moonlight, leaving everything in darkness. Her leg was injured, so maybe she thought she couldn't escape herself. If she can't escape, she won't let anyone else escape either? What kind of person is that? Sophie angrily tore off a couple of leaves, her eyes churning with emotion. A pitiful person. Trapped in hell, these people's minds had long since become twisted and deranged. I wouldn't be surprised by anything they did. Sophie and I slept on that tree branch all night. When we were abducted, we had just finished our martial arts practice and were out for breakfast. We had nothing on us but our phones. I sat on the branch, staring into space. Arriving in this strange little village empty-handed, the tough battles ahead were probably going to be difficult. Grumble, grumble. Sophie's eyes instantly lit up. She looked at me with delight. A wild chicken. Our lunch is sorted. I rolled my eyes and patted my empty stomach. That's your stomach, not a wild chicken. Want to eat it? Last night's dinner had 0 oil. After eating that, and then running all over the mountain, I was starving. For the sake of food, Sophie and I once again snuck into the village. Get those 2 women. I had a bun in my mouth, while Sophie had a chicken in her left hand and a duck in her right. Behind us, a large group of men with hoes and carrying poles were chasing us. With a long tail of pursuers, we weaved through the village, climbing trees and ducking under bridges, quickly shaking off the entire village. Holy crap, are those two part monkey? Damn it, just let me get my hands on them. The furious roars of the Zhao brothers echoed through the forest. Kill the chicken, bleed it, skewer it, and roast it over the fire. To prevent the smoke from being spotted by the villagers and interrupting our meal, Sophie and I pushed another hour deeper into the mountains. I've got a chicken in my left hand, a duck in my right, and a fat baby on my back. Sophie hummed a tune, so happy she was practically bubbling over. Just as she finished her song, the sound of a baby crying suddenly echoed through the dense forest. Wah wah wah. We looked at each other. Is that a giant salamander? A wildcat? Sophie clutched the chicken she had just started roasting, unwilling to leave. I dug a pit, wrapped the chicken in mud, buried it, and then built a fire in a nearby pit. All right, let's go check it out first. We can come back for the beggar's chicken later. Sophie finally cheered up, patted the dirt off her pants, and followed me. We followed the sound, winding our way through the trees, until we came to a valley. Hiss. Lucy, pinch me. I gave Sophie a hard pinch. She was still standing there with her mouth agape, staring in shock at the scene before her. In the valley grew a colossal wisteria tree. It towered into the clouds. Its trunk so thick it would take 3 or 4 people to wrap their arms around it. The wisteria blossoms were so dense that not a single green leaf was visible on the entire tree. As far as the eye could see, it was a sea of purple. Holy shit, that's beautiful. Sophie tilted her head back at a 45-degree angle, her gaze lost and entranced. Heh, it's terrifying to be uncultured. Besides beautiful and pretty. Can't you say anything else? Sophie wiped the drool from her chin, a little defiant. You think you can do better? Go ahead. I cleared my throat. As if a spring breeze had come overnight, adorning thousands of pear trees with blossoms white. You idiot. I'm a wisteria. A wisteria. A human face suddenly appeared on the thick tree trunk. It snarled at us, its features contorted in rage. Instantly, wisteria petals flew everywhere, turning the entire valley into a sea of purple, like a dream. Sophie and I had both been so captivated by the beautiful scenery that we hadn't noticed at first. The trunk of the wisteria tree looked remarkably like a woman's graceful figure, and at the base of the trunk, there were countless baby swaddling clothes. Inside the swaddling, there were tiny, delicate skeletons. 1, 2, 3, 4. I blinked, my eyes feeling dry and sore. These 68 children, did you drain all their life force? My sleeve was tugged. Sophie looked at the wisteria tree with a cold expression. It's 69. The face on the wisteria tree disappeared. A moment later, an even angrier face appeared. What the hell? Why are there idiots like you? It's 72. 72. Sophie and I paused. The murderous rage that had been building inside us was half dissipated by the tree demon's outburst. The scene became awkward. Ahem. I cleared my throat. The barrier around this village, you set it up, didn't you? And the half-demon core and Mrs. Lu, you gave it to her? No wonder Mrs. Lu always had such a strong sweet scent. I had thought she just used too much perfume, but now it seemed it was the fragrance of wisteria. The wisteria demon and Mrs. Lu had made a deal. The demon gave Mrs. Lu half of its core. Mrs. Lu absorbed the life force of infants to maintain her physical body, and half of that life force went into the demon core. After the infants died, Mrs. Lu would bury their bodies at the base of the tree, using their bones and blood as fertilizer to feed the demon. Hearing this, Sophie's eyes turned red with rage. She gritted her teeth and charged forward. Aarg, I'm going to kill you. Swish. A thick wisteria vine whipped through the air. Sophie was struck by the arm-thick vine and sent flying several meters into the air. If she fell from that height, she would be crippled if not dead. Sophie. I dodged a vine that whipped towards me and ran towards Sophie. It was our lucky day. Sophie landed squarely in the crown of a tree. After Sophie slid down, I grabbed her hand and we ran without looking back. In just one encounter, one of us almost died. This was a fight we couldn't win. The tree demon only had half its core and couldn't leave its main body to chase us. Sophie and I, disheveled and covered in dirt, returned to where we had been. We didn't even have the heart to eat the beggar's chicken. Sophie listlessly poked at the mud-caked chicken. After a moment, she threw the whole thing on the ground in frustration. This is so damn frustrating. As the mud cracked, a strange aroma wafted out. Having not seen a drop of oil for 3 days, Sophie and I immediately squatted down. The chicken skin was golden with a light char, and the exposed meat was tender and white, glistening with juice. Oh well. The demon was the one at fault. What did the food do wrong? We couldn't let this chicken die in vain. Sophie and I ate until our mouths were greasy. After we finished, we were determined to go back and get our gear. Sophie said that if we could just get her phone back, she could have our equipment delivered to the mountain in half a day. I was so angry at that tree demon that I couldn't eat or sleep properly. We scouted the terrain on the mountain, formulated various strategies and plans, and by the time we were done, the sun was setting. The sky always gets dark earlier in the mountains. Sophie and I once again snuck into the village under the cover of darkness. Mrs. Lu was acting strange today. She had a picture of her younger self on the table. Right now she was looking at the photo, crying and laughing. Sister Lu, it's been 15 years. 15 whole years. In 3 more days, it will be your birthday. When the time comes, I'll give you a big present. You'll definitely like it. Sophie and I exchanged a confused look. Sister Lu? After she finished crying, Mrs. Lu picked up a flashlight and left the courtyard, seemingly heading for the Zhao brothers' house. Sophie and I took the opportunity to sneak into her room and quickly found the phone she had confiscated from us. After getting our phones back, we made another round through the village. There were a total of 23 women locked in small rooms like we had been. Each one was disheveled and filthy, their ages impossible to tell. This time Sophie and I knew better. We didn't say a word, just quietly threw all sorts of food through the iron bars. Buns, steamed bread, corn, sweet potatoes. We had gathered everything edible in the village. After we had done what we needed to do, Sophie and I stole the elders' only bicycle. It was by far the most advanced mode of transportation in the village. We spent the night half running, half cycling down the mountain. The first thing we did when we got down was find a small hotel in town and take a shower. After being cooped up on the mountain in this heat for several days, we both reeked. Sophie's family was incredibly efficient. We took a nap in the small town, and before we even woke up, a helicopter had arrived. Re-equipped and re-energized, our whole demeanor changed. The next morning, we rode our dirt bikes, roaring our way up the mountain. It was still early, and the villagers were at home eating lunch. The loud roar of the motorcycle engines quickly drew everyone's attention. The men of the village, holding their rice bowls, stared in disbelief as Sophie and I returned. Sophie planted a foot on the ground and pulled a megaphone from a case. Listen up, villagers. You are surrounded. Release the women, and we'll spare your lives. With her full aura restored, and having taken the time to wash her hair, Sophie was back to her confident, boss lady self. When the Zhao brothers saw us, they were so angry their noses were crooked. Mrs. Lu's face was also grim. She stared at us, her eyes as cold as a poisoned dagger. You two dare to come back? Ismail Tahia. We're back to deal with your tree demon master. Hearing this, Mrs. Lu's face grew even colder. Since you already know, we have even less reason to let you live. Sophie rolled her eyes and patted the seat of her bike. Lucy, let's go. Time to kill that tree demon. Of course, Mrs. Lu and the others couldn't catch us. I had already set up a simple illusion array on the path between the village and the mountains. Anyone who walked into it would get turned around, like being in a ghost loop, and end up right back where they started. The path grew narrower. We parked the bikes and confidently headed up the mountain. In the great balance of things, everything has a counter. Although this Wisteria demon had cultivated for 1,000 years and formed a demon core, it currently only had half its core within it, with the other half in Mrs. Lu's body. It could only use half its power. And this time, I had brought a special weapon that was specifically designed to counter wood demons. Seeing us arrive, the Wisteria demon was surprised. Well, you escaped last time. This time, You can stay and be my fertilizer. Villains often die from talking too much. The moment it opened its mouth, Sophie and I were already flinging a volley of lightning talismans at its head. Arg! A blood-curdling scream echoed through the valley. Lightning is effective against all evil, but it is especially potent against plant-based spirits. The Wisteria demon couldn't run. Its massive body was a sitting duck. It tried to whip out a storm of vines to stop us. But when Sophie and I each pulled out a sword, it was stunned. In the 5 elements, metal conquers wood. And our swords weren't ordinary swords. They were antiques that Sophie had won at an auction. Real blades that had drawn blood and carried their own malevolent energy. After being brutalized by our arsenal of weapons, the tree demon couldn't take it anymore. Spare me. I have information to trade. I poked its trunk with my sword. You've taken 72 lives. The heavens will not tolerate you. The tree demon shrieked. You'll regret it if you kill me. The thing that's about to come out is way more powerful than me. I rolled my eyes, ready to keep hacking. The scarlet curse. Mrs. Liu has opened the altar to summon the scarlet curse. I froze, my sword clattering to the ground. Sophie looked at me bewildered. The scarlet curse? What's that? The scarlet curse is paid for with 1,000 lives. The vengeful souls of 100 innocent women, wrongfully killed, can merge under specific conditions to become the scarlet curse. And once the scarlet curse is unleashed, there is no known way to stop it. Because the scarlet curse is neither ghost nor demon, it's more like a curse. A curse created by the blood and souls of 100 women. This powerful resentment can only be appeased by 1,000 lives. 1,000 dead, and the scarlet curse will fade. Quick, where is the altar? The tree demon didn't hesitate. In the village's ancestral hall. There's a cellar underneath it, used to store food in the old days. My heart pounded in my chest. I abandoned the tree demon and sprinted away. Sophie, her face pale, ran after me. Sophie, go find our master. The scarlet curse is beyond what we can handle. Once the scarlet curse is out, no one will be left. It will devour both body and soul. Find a way to get the villagers down the mountain. Take as many as you can. Sophie immediately turned and ran. As I raced towards the ancestral hall, I prayed that Sophie could contact our master. Our master, Shunlingsu, founded our sect 1,000 years ago. Later, she went into seclusion for a millennium to achieve ascension. She only emerged last year and found us. If anyone in this world could deal with the scarlet curse, it would be her. I ran full pelt into the ancestral hall, and quickly found the cellar the tree demon had mentioned. I kicked open the cellar door and went in. Mrs. Liu was sitting in the middle of a massive pool of blood. She smiled at me, her expression both manic and triumphant. Little Taoist, you've come. Tell me, is it more compassionate to save 100 people, or to save 10,000? By sacrificing 100 to save 10,000, what have I done wrong? Only by completely eradicating this evil can we ensure that no more women will suffer in the future. Mrs. Liu's real name wasn't Lu Ping. It was Tina Chun. Tina came from a happy family. Her parents doted on her, and she excelled in her studies. In college, she met a classmate from a rural village. The classmate enthusiastically invited her to visit her hometown, saying the scenery was beautiful and the local customs were unique. The unsuspecting Tina went with her classmate to her village during her junior year summer break. The very village we were in now. Tina was deceived by her classmate. The village elder wanted to keep her as his daughter-in-law. When she refused, she was locked up, beaten daily, and deprived of food. That's when she met Lu Ping. Lu Ping was also the elder's daughter-in-law. The elder had 2 sons. The younger son was strong and smart. The older son, however, was born with an intellectual disability. Lu Ping was married to the older son. She would secretly come into Tina's room at night to tend to her wounds, and would save her own food to give to Tina. Tina had once tried to commit suicide, but it only resulted in more severe beatings. In her darkest moments of despair, Lu Ping comforted and guided her. Lu Ping had been trafficked for many years and had taken such good care of the elder's disabled son that she had earned the family's trust. Later, at Tina's desperate plea, Lu Ping agreed to help her escape. Out of kindness, before they fled, Lu Ping told another trafficked woman in the village about their plan, wanting to take her with them. Unexpectedly, that woman betrayed them. Lu Ping and Tina were chased into the mountains, hacked at with knives. To save Tina, Lu Ping took several slashes from the elder's disabled son. Tina was also injured. In their panicked flight, they ended up under the eerie Wisteria tree. Lu Ping died. Tina knew she was about to die too. She was not resigned to her fate. She hadn't even had a chance to see her parents again. She had never had a normal job, a social life, or met new friends. In the prime of her life, she had been tricked and had fallen into this living hell. That was when the tree demon appeared. It made a deal with Tina. It could help her get revenge, but Tina had to bring it 5 infants every year. Tina looked at the already dead Lu Ping and accepted the demon's offer. And she chose to live on in Lu Ping's body. The moment Lu Ping died, her soul was devoured by the tree demon. Tina just glanced at the demon. She felt that Lu Ping probably wouldn't want to be reincarnated. This world was too cruel. It was better not to come back for a next life. Tina inhabited Lu Ping's body, with half of the demon's core inside her. She dragged her injured body back to the village, and over time, regained the elder's trust. She proposed the wandering wife system, arguing that it would maximize the solution to the village's reproduction problem. She said that female infants were a waste of food. The village only needed strong men. From then on, if a girl was born, she would take it to the mountains and abandon it. As for the village's wives, she would find a way to buy them from the outside. And so, step by step, Tina worked her way into the core of the village's power structure. After those women were trafficked to the village, she repeatedly took action, causing the deaths of one pitiful woman after another. I stared at Mrs. Lu in shock. No, it should be Tina. This was a certified lunatic. Deceived by her classmate, betrayed by the companion she had tried to save. In her heart, Tina hated not only men but women too. The pool of blood bubbled, like a giant cauldron of boiling water. Tina threw her head back and laughed, tears of blood soon streaming down her face. The scarlet curse required the flesh and souls of 100 women. I glanced at the blood pool and felt a flicker of hope. Although the ritual was almost complete, it was still missing something. It was one person short. Tina hadn't gathered 100 people. Seeing me move my hands behind my back and start to inch forward, Tina smiled through her tears. Little Taoist, don't be naive. Do you think this ritual is still one person short of completion? Remember my name. It's Tina Chun. I lived in Harmony Homes in Westwood. If you can, could you go check on my parents for me? With that, Tina reached out and clawed at her own heart. It turned out she herself was the final sacrifice for the ritual. Tina, why don't you go see your parents yourself? I anxiously took a step forward, reaching out my hand. But it was too late. As the half-demon core floated into the air, Tina's body went limp in the pool of blood. A faint, ethereal figure rose from the eerie red mist. It was a young girl with a beautiful face and smiling eyes. Little Taoist, you should run. With those words, the shadow dissolved into a cloud of blood and vanished into the pool. Boom! The blood pool erupted like a geyser, shooting into the sky. An oppressive, despair-inducing presence slowly rose from the pool. I stood frozen, watching the dark red figure walk towards me step by step. Only then did I realize I couldn't move a muscle, couldn't even blink. Sigh. Just then, a faint sigh echoed through the air. I looked up in delight. Master. It was my master. The dark red figure bypassed me and shot outside. After a moment, I found I could move again and quickly ran out after it. The ground outside was shaking violently, like a massive earthquake. I struggled to keep my balance. Just as I reached the doorway, I saw an eerie red light flashing in the sky. Half the sky was stained red, and within the red light were flashes of familiar white light. Finally, the white light flared so brightly that it was impossible to keep my eyes open. I was forced to shut them. When I opened them again, I found that everything had vanished. My master was standing before me, smiling. She tilted her head, looked me over, then walked up and straightened my messy bun. It really was her. Last time, at the Taoist temple, my master said she had to go take care of something and would come back later to help me with the vampire fangs I'd grown. Who knew that shortly after she left, she'd come back? My master said that the thought of her disciple walking around with vampire fangs made her skin crawl. That was my germaphobe master. Same old master, same old quirks. Master, is the scarlet curse dealt with? I ran up to her excitedly. My master rubbed her nose. I suppose you could say it's dealt with. Sophie, standing to the side, was frantically winking at me. I turned my head to look and instantly gasped. All the young and able-bodied men in the village had been transformed into frail, elderly men. White hair, missing teeth, trembling hands and feet. Just standing there seemed to take all their strength. Ahem. My master cleared her throat. When the scarlet curse appears, it must take something. I just casually let it take some of their life force and lifespan. No need to worry about the details. As for you, how's the hunt for those ghouls and ghosts that escaped the temple going? Your junior nephews Qingxian and Qingyu have already caught quite a few. Sophie and I hung our heads in shame. Master came and went quickly. After staying for only a short while, she left, taking the wisteria tree with her. Before she left, she gave us a suggestion. She told me and Sophie to open a funeral parlor, specializing in handling funeral services. With thousands of ghouls and ghosts hiding among billions of people, searching for them like we were was like finding a needle in a haystack. By having more contact with the deceased, we would have more opportunities to find them. Sophie stroked her chin and started thinking of a name for our funeral parlor. Songlin Funeral Services? Hey Songlin so long. Get it? That's good, it's a pun. Ha 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 ha, I'm a genius. Just as Sophie was beaming with delight, an old man staggered towards us. Dem you to dem. His missing teeth made his speech slurred. Sophie and I stared at him for a long time before realizing it was Richie. He was probably trying to say, "Demons, you two are demons." He'd lost all his teeth and was still trying to curse at us. Get out of the way. Sophie gave him a gentle push, and Richie fell to the ground, unable to get up for a long time. What the hell? Is he trying to pull a scam? Sophie and I exchanged a look, then pretended not to see anything and stepped over Richie's body. In the surrounding 10 or so villages, nearly 2,000 people had aged overnight. And in every village, many trafficked and imprisoned women were discovered. The case was so bizarre that it was quickly suppressed. Sophie and I also went home. Before we did, we made a trip to Harmony Homes in Westwood. Have you seen our Tina? What about you? Have you seen our Tina? There was a small park at the entrance to the community, where many elderly people sat chatting and playing chess. A white-haired woman in her early 60s was tirelessly grabbing people and asking questions. A kind-looking man with glasses followed her, constantly apologizing to the people she bothered. Have you seen my Tina? The woman grabbed my sleeve, her expression a mixture of despair and hope. My heart ached and my eyes reddened. I have. The woman trembled. Really? My Tina is 21. She's very pretty, with a round face and 2 dimples when she smiles. You really saw our Tina? That child, she hasn't even finished school yet. Where did she run off to? I clenched my fists. I saw her abroad. She's studying abroad. She's already graduated and working now. Graduated? And working? Good, that's great. I need to call Tina right away. She has to eat well abroad. I wonder if she has enough money. The woman turned and hurried home, her steps light and her expression joyful. The man gave me an apologetic smile and quickened his pace to follow his wife. Sigh, what a tragedy. The other elderly people standing nearby came over and began to lament. It's been so hard for Professor Chin. His wife went mad after their daughter disappeared at 21. Yeah, she asks everyone she meets if they've seen Tina. Tina's been missing for over a decade, right? The crowd watched Tina's parents leave, sighing with sympathy. Sophie and I hung our heads, neither of us in the mood to talk. After a long while, Sophie asked in a low voice, "Lucy, is there any way for Tina to visit them in a dream?" I gave a bitter smile and shook my head. She can't. Tina sacrificed her own soul to the scarlet curse. Her soul is scattered. Sophie sighed. I can almost understand Tina. Even though she was insane, some evils really do need to be wiped off the face of this earth. Our spirits low, we headed home in silence. After some discussion, Sophie and I decided to launch an online campaign to help find missing people. We offered to help search for anyone's missing family members for free. Demons needed to be exorcised, but the living also needed to be saved. To help with the search, Sophie even set up a foundation, forcing her friends to donate and support it. Human affairs would be handled by humans. After a brief period of intense activity, Sophie and I followed our master's advice and opened a funeral parlor, specializing in handling funeral services. One day, as I was busy drawing talismans, Sophie came running over beaming. "Lucy, we've got a job. Our Song Lin Funeral Services finally has its first client." The end.